The moment your paycheck lands, a vote is held on your future. And most people lose that vote before the bank app even finishes loading. They think the problem is income. They think the problem is inflation. They think the problem is that groceries cost too much. Rent is absurd, and life keeps inventing new ways to reach into their pockets. Some of that is true. But I have watched this long enough to tell you something far less comforting. A great many people are not poor because money never enters their life. They stay poor because the moment money enters their life, it enters a building with no switchboard. If you do not control the switchboard, every wire in your life starts stealing current. The landlord takes his line, the credit card takes its line, the car takes its line, appetite takes its line, fatigue takes its line, loneliness takes its line, convenience takes its line, status takes its line, and by the time you finally ask what is left for freedom, there is nothing left to power it. That is why so many intelligent people live like well-dressed hostages. The paycheck arrives, but it never becomes capital, it only becomes relief. I have spent my life allocating capital. And the first rule of capital allocation is not about return. It is about routing. Before you ask what a dollar can earn, you ask where the dollar goes. Before you talk about growth, you deal with leakage. Before you talk about abundance, you take control of flow. Most people do the exact opposite. They let the money hit their account, and then they let emotion behave like an unelected utility company. Excitement starts drawing power. Deprivation starts drawing power. The little voice that says you deserve something starts drawing power. Then the month becomes a competition between income and impulse. And impulse usually has better timing. That is why I do not look at payday as a reward. I look at payday as grid management. Every paycheck is a fresh surge of electrical current entering your private financial system. If your system is wired badly, more current only means a larger fire. If your system is wired well, even moderate current can light an entire future. The average person never learns this because the world trains you to think in purchases, not in power. It trains you to ask, what can I afford this week? When the real question is, what am I wiring this money to become? That difference sounds philosophical. It is not. It is arithmetic, it is behavior, it is architecture. You do not get rich by admiring the right ideas, you get rich by sending money through the right circuits in the right order every single time current enters the building. If you fail to do that, your paycheck becomes a monthly rescue boat with a hole in the bottom. It arrives, it calms you, it floats for a while, then it sinks in exactly the same place as the last one. I want to be even more direct than that. A paycheck is not income. A paycheck is stored choice. If you route it badly, you convert stored choice into automatic obedience. You become obedient to the landlord, obedient to the lender, obedient to the car note, obedient to every recurring charge that figured out how to arrive before your ambition does. If you route it well, you convert stored choice into refusal power. You buy the ability to say no, no to panic, no to bad debt, no to stupid bosses, no to desperate decisions, no to being trapped by the next emergency. Most people never build that power because they commit what I call arrival theft. Arrival theft happens when money is mentally spent before it is strategically assigned. The paycheck hits, and in your mind, the money already belongs to 10 future cravings. The gadget has a claim on it, the restaurant has a claim on it, the trip has a claim on it, the sale has a claim on it. The shoes, the upgrades, the tiny self-congratulations, the little emotional repairs after a hard week, all of them rush the switchboard before your future ever gets a vote. You call it normal life. I call it looting the control room. The most dangerous part is that it does not feel reckless. It feels human. That is why it is so common. People imagine financial ruin arrives wearing a leather jacket and making dramatic speeches. Usually it arrives disguised as little treats, tiny conveniences, manageable subscriptions, and I'll make it up next month. No, you will not, because next month the same weak switchboard will be waiting for the same current and the same wires will be hungry. So the first thing I would do every single time I get paid is simple. I would audit the load. I would want brutal clarity on what percentage of my take. Home pay is going to true necessities, not feelings, not preferences, not ego maintenance, necessities, housing, basic food, basic transportation, essential utilities, essential health care. That is the backbone load. Everything else is a secondary circuit. And if you label luxury as necessity, you are not budgeting. You are lying with categories. Most people do exactly that. They smuggle comfort into survival. They smuggle status into transportation. They smuggle boredom solutions into recurring need. They smuggle convenience into basic living and then act shocked that they cannot build wealth. If more than roughly 60 cents of every take-home dollar is vanishing into true necessity, I do not need a motivational speech. I need a structural diagnosis. Either the life is too expensive for the income, or the income is too small for the life, or the definition of necessity has become corrupted by convenience. There is no shame in any one of those realities, but there is danger in refusing to name them. Suppose a household takes home around $4,750 a month. If rent claims $1,800, transportation claims $400, and basic food claims $500, you are already near $2,700 of fixed load. That is a meaningful chunk of the system before you have paid a single optional bill, before a single desire has touched the panel, before a single surprise has arrived. That kind of system can work, but only if the operator is honest. What destroys the household is not always the visible fixed load. It is the invisible swarm around it, the streaming services that feel harmless, the food delivery because everyone is tired, the coffee ritual that has become identity, the little digital drips, the just this once purchases that happen 4 times a week. Each one is small enough to escape shame. Together they turn a manageable electrical system into a brownout. That is why wealth begins with distinguishing voltage from noise. I never confuse what keeps me alive with what keeps me entertained. I never confuse what I need to function with what I use to sedate myself. If you cannot make that distinction, you will never control the switchboard, because your wants will arrive wearing the uniforms of your needs. Once I know the load, I move to the next rule. Keep the reputation circuit alive. A great many people think debt management is mostly about paying less interest that matters. But before you talk about optimization, you talk about continuity. Minimum payments made on time are not a sign of financial brilliance. They are a sign that the lights are still on in the part of your system that the outside world judges. Your credit profile is not morality. It is not worth, but it is a reputation machine. And reputation machines are expensive to repair after you let them short out. One missed payment can do more damage than 10 good intentions can fix. That offends people because it feels unfair. I do not waste much time arguing with systems for being unfair. I ask how they score the game. Then I decide whether I am willing to play carelessly. In school, 97% looks excellent. In credit, 97% on time behavior can still leave a stain that costs real money. Higher borrowing costs, worse loan terms, harder housing options. Fewer choices in moments when choice matters most. So on payday, before I fantasize about progress, I protect the reputation circuit. Minimums get handled, not because minimums build wealth. They do not. They preserve order while you build something better. They keep late fees from becoming stupidity taxes. They keep small errors from multiplying into expensive labels. Then I move to the circuit that almost nobody respects until life punches them in the throat. The shock absorber, other people call it an emergency fund. Fine, I call it a refusal battery, because that is what it really is. A refusal battery is cash that allows you to refuse collapse. When the car dies, you refuse panic debt. When the laptop fails, you refuse desperation. When the dog needs surgery, you refuse a financial tailspin. When the boss becomes unbearable, you refuse immediate surrender to the pay cycle. When layoffs begin, you refuse to negotiate from starvation. That is what cash reserve really buys. Not yield, not excitement, not stories. It buys negotiating posture. Most people are too sophisticated to understand this. They are forever trying to make the emergency reserve productive. They want it invested, optimized, squeezed for return, or locked somewhere clever. That is because they still do not understand the switchboard. The purpose of a refusal battery is not to grow. It is to stand there fully charged while the rest of life misbehaves. Boring cash has rescued more lives than exciting strategies. If your true living load is $2,700 a month, then a refusal battery somewhere in the range of 3 to 6 months means real money. 8,000, 10,000, 12,000, 16,000. Numbers that make people exhale and say impossible. Note, not impossible, merely unfashionable. You are not required to build it in a weekend. You build it paycheck, by routing current on purpose. What matters is not that you begin with a full battery. What matters is that you stop pretending you do not need one. A person with no refusal battery is one emergency away from becoming obedient to whatever solution shows up first. That is not financial life. That is civilian fragility. Once the refusal battery exists, the entire emotional climate of a household changes. You sleep differently, you think differently, you speak differently at work, you stop reacting to every inconvenience as if it were a threat to your existence. You stop confusing a temporary problem with total ruin. That psychological dividend is enormous. People love to talk about return on investment. I like that subject, but one of the highest returns in life is the return on reduced panic. Now, after the load is clear, the reputation circuit is protected, and the refusal battery is being built. Only then do I turn to the circuit that most people either neglect or romanticize: ownership. This is where the entire story flips. Most households pay bills first, indulge second, and then try to save what remains. That sequence guarantees that saving will forever feel accidental. Wealth never becomes accidental at scale. Wealth becomes systematic. You must wire ownership ahead of indulgence. That does not mean you live like a monk. It means you stop treating your future like the last claimant on current. If an employer is willing to match retirement contributions, that is not an optional benefit. That is a live wire hanging in the room, and people walk past it every day because nobody taught them how to recognize free current. If a company will match 3% of a $60,000 salary, and you refuse to contribute the amount required to receive that match, you are not being cautious. You are declining an immediate 100% return because the paperwork feels annoying or because the future feels abstract. I have seen smarter people do stupider things. The match comes first because it is a forced amplifier. After that, I care about building an ownership habit that keeps compounding whether I feel inspired or not. 10% of gross income is not a magical number sent down from heaven. It is simply a serious number. A number large enough to matter, small enough to start, and powerful enough to become a fortune if you stop interrupting it. The tragedy is that most people delay because they think they need the perfect plan. They research funds the way medieval people studied omens. They compare tiny differences while ignoring the real giant in the room, which is time. The market does not pay you for your sophisticated hesitation. It pays you for duration, consistency, and the humility to keep buying productive assets long before it feels cinematic. If a 25-year-old puts away $300 a month and earns something like an 8% long-run return, the mathematics become absurdly friendly over decades. If that same person waits 10 years, the lost time does more damage than most spending mistakes ever will. Delay is not neutral. Delay is negative compounding. Time is the most underpriced asset in personal finance because people cannot feel it leaving. They can feel a car payment. They can feel a grocery bill. They can feel a vacation charge. They cannot feel the $1 million ghost created by 10 years of inaction. But I can, which is why I do not need complexity to begin. A broad, low-cost index fund, purchased consistently, can do far more for an ordinary household than a highly discussed strategy executed inconsistently. The market does not require performance theater. It requires ownership, long-term, patient, repeated ownership. After that, we confront the noisy circuit. Debt beyond the mortgage. This is where people become strangely theological. Avalanche, snowball, highest rate first, smallest balance first. Everyone wants the perfect doctrine. I am less interested in doctrine than in obedience to process. If mathematics keeps you disciplined, use the avalanche, kill the highest rate first, and save the most interest. If quick wins keep you disciplined, use the snowball, kill the smallest balance first, and create momentum. What I do not tolerate is drift. I do not tolerate changing methods every 6 weeks because emotion got bored. Debt is not repaid by cleverness. It is repaid by directed pressure applied over time. That is true of almost everything that matters. I also want to say something that many people need to hear and do not want to hear. Personal finance is rarely defeated by lack of intelligence. It is usually defeated by lack of emotional sequencing. A person can understand every spreadsheet and still fail because shame makes them avoid the numbers. A person can understand interest rates and still fail because fatigue makes them seek tiny rewards every evening. A person can understand compounding and still fail because they want external proof before internal discipline. That is why the switchboard matters more than motivation. Motivation is weather. Wiring is architecture. When the fundamental circuits are in place, I can add sophistication. Tax, advantaged accounts, Roth structures, taxable brokerage accounts for longer-term wealth, outside formal retirement systems, different lanes for different forms of capital. Fine, useful, important. But sophistication without sequence is just expensive confusion. A Roth Style account is powerful because it turns today's tax dollars into future tax. Free growth. A taxable brokerage account is useful because it creates additional ownership beyond formal retirement fences. Long holding periods matter because tax friction matters. The more often you thrash around, the more you invite drag into the system. But again, none of this rescues a household whose switchboard is still being run by appetite. That is why the final step is the only one that makes the rest real. Automation. I do not say that because automation is modern or trendy. I say it because human beings are unreliable operators of their own best interest when temptation arrives on schedule. Willpower is overrated. People treat willpower as if it were a stable asset class. It is not. It is a decaying battery. It drains under stress, under fatigue, under friction, under social pressure, under boredom, under convenience, under one hard day at work, under one argument at home, under one sale notification delivered at exactly the wrong moment. If your entire financial future depends on how virtuous you feel every other Friday, you have no system. You have a prayer. I do not pray over switchboards. I wire them. So when the paycheck arrives, I want a short buffer. One day is reasonable. Let the money settle. Let the deposit clear. Then the relay begins. The first transfers move automatically. The refusal battery receives its current if it is not yet fully charged. The ownership circuit receives its current, whether I am inspired or not. The debt circuit receives its planned attack. Tax reserves, if relevant, receive their allocation. Specific goals receive their assigned flow. What remains after those decisions is spending money, not before. That order changes everything, because most people spend first and strategize later. By the time later arrives, all the meaningful current has already been consumed by whatever screamed loudest. Automation solves that by making the scream irrelevant. When the system is wired properly, payday stops being an emotional event. It becomes an operational event. A process. A controlled transfer through known lines. That is how money becomes calm. That is how progress becomes boring. That is how boring becomes rich. There is another advantage to automation that people underestimate. It exposes truth. If you automate a reasonable savings rate and suddenly discover you cannot live on what remains, the automation did not create a problem. It revealed one. It showed you the life was already overdrawn. It showed you the load was too high. It showed you that either expenses must fall or income must rise or both. That is useful information, painful but useful. The alternative is a life in which you never discover the truth because every month is patched together with improvisation and denial. I would rather meet an ugly fact in bright light than spend 10 years decorating a lie. Of course, automation is not a one-time act. A switchboard needs recalibration. When income rises, I do not celebrate by letting lifestyle colonize the new current. I update the routing, more to ownership, more to freedom, more to resilience. The easiest way to stay average at a higher income is to preserve the same loose wiring that kept you average at a lower one. Raises do not fix weak systems. They feed them. Likewise, when a debt disappears, the monthly current that used to feed it must be rerouted immediately. Otherwise, the old payment simply evaporates into lifestyle fog. One paid-off balance can become the seed of a major investment line. If you move the wire the same day, the old burden dies. This is what wealthy behavior actually looks like. Not exotic, not glamorous, not loud. It looks like current being reassigned before appetite notices. I want to press on one more point, because it separates workers from owners. Workers experience payday as permission. Owners experience payday as allocation. Workers ask what can be purchased. Owners ask what can be strengthened. Workers experience leftover money as savings. Owners create savings first and experience the leftovers as spending. Workers look for emotional relief. Owners build structural relief. Workers want life to feel better this week. Owners want life to become harder to break 5 years from now. The difference sounds small because it happens at the switchboard, but the switchboard determines the building. A household with no routing discipline will stay fragile at $50,000 a year, fragile at $80,000 a year, fragile at $120,000 a year, and then it will invent ever more sophisticated stories for why nothing sticks. A household with real routing discipline can begin at modest income and still build a staircase out of ordinary paychecks. Not instantly, not painlessly, but reliably. That word matters more than inspiration ever will. Reliably reliable saving, reliable investing, reliable debt reduction, reliable reserves, reliable refusal power, reliable compounding. The world loves extreme stories because they sell. One stock that exploded, one business that went viral, one real estate deal that changed everything. Fine. Those things happen. But for the overwhelming majority of people, wealth is not built by jackpots. It is built by owning the switchboard long enough for thousands of tiny disciplined transfers to become a large private engine. That engine eventually changes your identity. At first, you are just paying attention. Then you are just getting organized. Then you are just building a little reserve. Then you are just investing consistently. Then one day you notice something strange. A setback arrives, and you do not panic. A bad boss makes a bad demand, and you do not feel trapped. A market decline appears, and instead of fear you feel prepared. A bill shows up, and it does not hijack the month. That is the first sign the switchboard is no longer controlling you. You are controlling it. Most people want financial freedom without passing through financial order. They want the feeling without the routing. They want abundance without boundaries. They want wealth without boring repetition. They want peace without reserves. They want options without ownership. They want a future without sacrificing immediate voltage to build it. That bargain does not exist. There is no freedom switch you can buy later if you refuse to wire one now. So here is the brutal truth. Every payday, you are not deciding how to use money. You are deciding which version of you gets electricity. The frightened version, the performative version, the impulsive version, the exhausted version, or the strategic version, the patient version, the future owner, the one who treats every dollar as a worker, every transfer as a vote, every reserve as armor, every investment as a claim on future output, and every automated line as a wall between his family and chaos. That is the real test. Not whether you earn enough to impress other people. Whether you can build a switchboard strong enough to stop your own life from stealing your future the moment current arrives. If I were starting from scratch, I would not begin by chasing genius. I would begin by taking over the panel. I would identify the true load. I would keep the reputation circuit current. I would build the refusal battery until emergencies stopped dictating my behavior. I would route ownership ahead of indulgence. I would attack debt with consistency, not drama. I would place long-term capital into simple productive assets. I would automate the whole thing so my moods could no longer sabotage my mathematics. Then I would repeat it again, not because repetition is exciting, but because repetition is how small streams become power plants. That is how an ordinary paycheck stops being relief and starts becoming leverage. That is how a worker stops renting stability and starts owning it. That is how your money stops disappearing into wires you did not choose and starts strengthening the circuits that can carry you out of dependence. And now you come to the door most people avoid, because once you understand this, you lose the right to pretend you do not know why your money keeps vanishing. You can keep treating payday like a brief emotional holiday. You can keep telling yourself that next month will somehow be different without new wiring. You can keep calling your wants necessities, your drift bad luck, your leakage normal, your inaction caution, and your fragility realism. Or you can take the panel back. You can decide that the next paycheck will not enter a dark building. You can decide that when current hits, it will meet order. It will meet a battery. It will meet ownership. It will meet automation. It will meet a future that was already waiting for it. Most people will not do this. They will keep living as if income is the answer, while routing guarantees the result. That is why they will work harder and still feel hunted. If you want a different life, do not begin with more money. Begin with a better switchboard. The next paycheck is coming whether you are ready or not. The only question is whether it arrives as electricity for your future or as heat for another fire. Choose before it hits.